From cable yarders pulling timber uphill to loaders stacking logs with millimeter control, this is the journey of wood in motion. Watch trucks loaded, yards organized, mills fed, and massive logs transformed step by step. Every lift, every cut, every placement driven by planning, not force. From forest floor to finished material, this is how timber moves when control, timing, and experience come together. Multiple stems travel uphill per turn as log yarding at Pacific North 2016 moves timber toward the landing. A yarder holds tension on the skyline, while chokers are set to grouped stems, guiding them uphill toward the landing. Lines tighten, lift clears obstacles, and turns travel in controlled paths to keep ground impact low. That steady pull feels stronger than expected for such long distances. At the landing, logs are released, sorted, and stacked before the next cycle lines up. This setup feels like muscle and planning working side by side. Repetition builds flow across the slope, keeping timing consistent and crews coordinated. Didn't expect the turns to arrive this clean on uneven ground. Cable angles stay disciplined overall. Once timber reaches the landing, the challenge shifts from movement to organization. Cable systems deliver volume, but order is what keeps everything moving forward. This is where yarding hands off to loading, and precision at the landing determines how smoothly logs transition from slope to road. The loader selects, grips, and places saw logs to build stable stacks during log truck loading. It aligns each stem over the bunk, adjusts reach, and lowers weight evenly to protect stakes. Logs arrive from the deck, rotate into position, and settle into tight rows that maximize payload. That grab before the set always looks like a power move. Spacing matters, so the operator fine-tunes angles to keep the stack balanced for travel. Chains follow, cinching the load to prevent shift on rough roads. This setup feels like muscle and judgment working together. Pace stays steady to avoid damage, while keeping trucks moving. Didn't expect the stack to lock in this clean on the first pass. Repeats continue until height and length match legal limits. Then the loader clears the lane for departure. Turn management keeps center of gravity low, and timing between lifts prevents bounce. That speed alone could catch anyone off guard the first time. Final checks confirm clearance, paperwork follows, and the truck rolls out set for transport. Consistency across loads helps drivers plan routes and fuel stops without surprises along the way ahead. With logs organized and staged at the landing, the final handoff begins. Attention shifts to how weight, balance, and spacing are managed one lift at a time. This is where the loader takes over, turning order on the ground into secure loads ready for the road. Follow each controlled lift while the 320 CLL Caterpillar log loader places saw logs onto the truck bed. Logs are aligned by grapple movement before being stacked onto waiting trucks. Hydraulic arms adjust reach and angle to keep loads balanced during placement. The loader repeats the cycle without pause, building consistent piles efficiently. Timber lines up cleaner than expected. Once the load is built, movement becomes a shared responsibility. The focus shifts from machinery alone to coordination between people, equipment, and space. On active landings, timing and communication decide whether the work stays controlled or turns unpredictable. Drivers coordinate movement zones, confirm signals, and hold position during loading. That pause prevents close calls while logs settle onto the bunk. Procedures adapt to shifting ground, traffic, and equipment paths. Communication stays constant, not optional across each change. Drivers remain inside the cab during loading whenever possible. Stepping out changes risk instantly and requires visibility to the log loader operator. No guessing here. Confirmation matters before any move. Site awareness guides every approach. With safety protocols in place and communication locked in, loading becomes a synchronized operation. Every movement now depends on timing, visibility, and trust between machine and driver. This is where coordination turns heavy lifting into controlled flow. Active forest loading keeps the Manson 95 crane and Monster V8 truck in constant coordination. Logs are aligned, lifted, and placed onto the Monster V8 truck through steady coordination. The crane adjusts boom angle and grip width to match log length. One slow swing changes everything during placement. Operators maintain distance and clear sight lines. No rushed moves here, just controlled handling. Each load settles securely before transport continues deeper into the forest. Once timber leaves the forest, pressure to move fast gives way to the need for order. The work shifts from coordination under load to long-term control over material behavior. This is where yard handling takes over, setting the conditions that downstream processing will depend on. Dedicated yard handling configurations allow Holtec equipment to manage dense log storage. Logs are received, grouped by diameter, and positioned to allow steady feeding without forcing alignment. Storage time helps balance moisture before movement toward the infeed zone. That pause matters more than it looks. Loader arms lift each log and set it down following yard order rather than speed. Spacing stays deliberate so bark damage and surface stress stay low. This feels less like rushing material and more like managing behavior. From there, roundwood moves onward, ready for sawing stages beyond the yard. Hardwood and softwood are kept readable, traceable, and easy to retrieve. A clean yard quietly decides how smooth everything else will go, much later in production flow lines. That same emphasis on order carries deeper into the Millyard, where equipment choice and layout begin to matter more than raw pace. This is where CAT machines translate operator intent into repeatable structure, turning mixed inbound timber into predictable, workable flow. CAT Millyard machines respond smoothly to operator input, turning control decisions into clean log rows. Logs enter the yard by truck and are staged by wheel loaders that balance reach, lift capacity, and tire stability to keep stacks accessible rather than piled at random. Loader positioning defines stack angles early, which directly affects how later machines approach each log. Material handlers take over positioning, rotating logs to align diameters and lengths for downstream handling, and this is where layout choices quietly decide whether a yard feels calm or chaotic. Consistent orientation reduces mid-task corrections during log rotation and placement. Feed rates stay consistent because machines share compatible working ranges instead of competing for space, and you can almost feel how lost seconds disappear when machines stop waiting on each other. As logs move toward processing zones, tracked and wheeled units alternate roles depending on ground conditions, keeping traction predictable while protecting yard surfaces. Machine selection shifts based on ground response, rather than production pressure. Sorting follows practical criteria: species, diameter, and destination. So the yard feeds saw lines without reshuffling later, and this kind of order saves more time than any single fast move ever could. Operators rely on visibility and attachment control rather than speed, guiding logs into clean rows that support later transport. Clear sight lines reduce hesitation during close stacking sequences. The machines shift between lifting, stacking, and feeding without changeovers, which reduces idle moments across the shift. And that multitasking approach feels less like pushing harder and more like removing friction. Power delivery stays steady under load, allowing smooth log placement instead of abrupt drops that disrupt spacing. As the yard fills and clears in cycles, equipment spacing prevents overlap while still keeping transfer distances short. Predictable spacing keeps machine paths readable throughout the cycle. By the end of a run, timber exits the Millyard in predictable sequences, ready for processing, proving that coordinated equipment matters more than brute force alone. Once yard flow becomes predictable, attention shifts from movement to transformation. That's where disciplined sorting and steady feeding give way to mills built around one material, refined again and again for consistency, rather than volume alone. Consistent beech output from Pohlmeyer supports furniture and flooring across Europe. Logs arrive sorted by diameter and length, feeding a system built around consistency rather than volume alone. Primary breakdown lines guide each log into optimized cuts that reduce waste and keep fiber direction predictable. This is where specialization quietly pays off. Automated scanners adjust cutting paths instead of forcing uniform sizes. Boards move through drying stages tuned for hardwood behavior, not shortcuts. Moisture targets stay tight to prevent distortion later. Miss that window, and the board tells on you fast. Planing and grading follow with strict tolerances, sending only verified lumber forward. Offcuts return to energy use, closing material loops. Nothing here feels rushed, but nothing sits idle either. The flow favors repeatability over spectacle. The result supports furniture, flooring, and engineered products across Europe, without chasing variety for its own sake. When production shifts away from single machines and toward the entire site moving as one, forestry becomes less about output and more about orchestration. Every decision upstream starts to matter, because once the first cut is made, everything else has to flow. HDL and Newcastle Timber organize cutting, skidding, processing, and loading into a continuous logging sequence. Access roads guide machines into position before any tree handling takes place. Harvesters select stems based on spacing and stand condition rather than volume alone. That choice shapes the forest long after the machines leave. Felling stays controlled so trunks fall clean and avoid striking nearby growth. Logs are then measured, delimbed, and sorted directly at the stump. You feel the pace slow down for decisions that actually matter. Processors keep lengths consistent to match hauling requirements downstream. Forwarders collect sorted timber in planned passes instead of random grabs. This is where patience quietly pays off. Each load is balanced to handle slopes without shifting weight. Trucks wait only after staging areas are ready, reducing idle time and congestion. That coordination saves more than fuel. Communication between operators replaces rigid sequencing, letting terrain dictate timing. Wet ground changes routes. Dry patches allow faster cycles. Some days feel heavier than others, and the wood seems to know it. By the time logs leave the site, damage is limited, and remaining stands stay readable for future cuts. The operation moves on without forcing the landscape to hurry. After logs leave the forest and coordination gives way to material choice, the focus narrows even further. When the wood is valuable and the dimensions don't fit standard lines, processing comes to the log instead of the other way around. And that's where mobile milling earns its place. A mobile Holtzlang sawmill shows how very thick walnut can be processed without a fixed industrial setup. The log is positioned and stabilized first, allowing the saw head to travel cleanly along the grain instead of forcing the material to adapt to the machine. Initial passes flatten reference faces, creating reliable surfaces for later cuts that determine board width and thickness. That first alignment step quietly decides whether the rest of the cut feels calm or turns into constant correction. Feed speed stays conservative, keeping blade load even as dense walnut resists more than softer species. Slabs are removed one by one, revealing color variation and internal structure that guides how the next boards are planned. You suddenly notice how much judgment goes into each pass, especially with valuable hardwood. Short sections and irregular diameters are handled without resetting the whole setup, showing why mobile systems fit specialty jobs so well. There's a strange relief seeing such heavy wood handled without rush, because mistakes here cost more than time. Final boards are stacked and checked for consistency, ready for drying or further processing depending on the customer's plan. The operation avoids showmanship, relying instead on steady sequencing, measured movement, and decisions made cut by cut. By the end, the walnut has been converted efficiently, proving that mobility and careful planning can match the output quality of larger fixed mills. Once mobile milling handles specialty pieces and irregular dimensions, the process shifts again when volume, variety, and patience converge. At larger saw lines, time spent in storage becomes part of the cutting strategy itself, letting different hardwoods move through in planned succession rather than reacting at the blade. Multiple hardwood species stored over time are now cut in sequence at Wimmer sagework, where oak, ash, and walnut logs move through the saw line. Storing these logs over an extended period allows internal stresses to stabilize before cutting, which supports cleaner, more predictable passes at the saw. Length and diameter guide positioning as the saw carriage advances, keeping cuts consistent across mixed species without constant adjustment. That positioning choice determines how straight the first boards come off across different hardwood types. Oak enters with dense structure, demanding slower feed control, while ash follows with cleaner separation along the grain. The shift from oak to ash changes resistance at the blade without changing the setup. Walnut arrives last, darker and heavier, and the contrast between species keeps the pace from feeling repetitive. The blade tracks through stored material that has already settled, reducing unexpected movement during cutting. Boards stack in sequence, and waste paths stay predictable, instead of crossing back into the workflow. No rushing here, just a calm rhythm that lets the saw do its job. Operators focus on alignment and timing rather than force, guiding each trunk through without forcing speed changes. As cutting continues, stacks build by species and size, ready for the next handling stage without reshuffling. The final boards reflect decisions made long before the saw engaged, showing how storage, selection, and cutting belong to the same system. By the end, Wimmer sagework turns long-held logs into usable timber through consistency, not shortcuts. When logs transition from mixed hardwood flow into squared stock, priorities shift again. At this stage, variability is already managed, and what matters most is repeatability under load. This is where block breakdown takes over, turning mass and density into something precise enough to trust on every pass. Large timber blocks are reduced into uniform boards at Sarah, Montana, using a block band sage designed for high-accuracy cutting in industrial sawmilling. This setup focuses on stability and straight tracking rather than rushing material through the line. Each block enters aligned to reference guides that control lateral drift and maintain consistent thickness across the cut. Blade tension and feed pressure are balanced to suit dense sections without forcing the band. That steady advance keeps the blade honest, especially through knots and uneven grain. Height adjustments are made between passes to match the required board dimensions while keeping waste predictable. This is the kind of control that saves material without slowing output. As the band progresses, surfaces come off clean enough to reduce downstream planing. Boards exit in sequence and stay square, simplifying stacking and handling. Misalignment would multiply errors fast, so operators watch tracking points closely instead of relying on speed alone. One slip here would echo through every board after it, and nobody wants that. Funny how silence from the blade usually means everything is going right, not wrong. The system repeats this cycle, block after block, delivering reliable dimensions with minimal correction required. After sawing and sorting, not everything moves forward as lumber. Offcuts, tops, and right-of-way debris still need a controlled exit from the system. This is where reduction replaces refinement, and consistency matters just as much as precision. Right-of-way clearing and yard waste reduction are handled daily by the CBI 6800 horizontal grinder at Supreme Forest Products. Incoming yard waste feeds steadily into the infeed, where the upswing design helps manage bulky loads before contact. Rotor engagement stays consistent, breaking material down without sudden stalls. That steady pull changes how the whole yard keeps pace. Screen selection shapes final output size, balancing reduction speed with product consistency. Ground material exits cleanly, ready for reuse instead of lingering in piles. Operators focus on flow control, adjusting feed rate to match changing material density rather than forcing throughput. Power delivery remains predictable, supporting long runs without disruption. Maintenance access supports uptime, keeping routine checks part of the daily rhythm. This is the kind of machine that earns trust by showing up every shift. The grinder handles right-of-way debris and mixed waste with the same approach. Output volume stays high, but control stays higher. That balance keeps production moving without drama. Once grinding and waste reduction are complete, the focus shifts from processing material to reorganizing the ground itself. What's left behind still needs structure before the land can move forward. This is where controlled sweeping replaces cutting, and surface order becomes the priority. Dragged through rough terrain yet staying controlled, the bush rig TRKT 1680-8 by ERDVARK organizes cleared land efficiently. Heavy-duty tines sweep across uneven ground, pulling vegetation, rocks, and roots without hesitation. That rake angle decides whether the path stays clean or turns chaotic. Blade-plowed fields enter the workflow 1 to 2 weeks later, where loosened material lines up for burning or chipping. Operators adjust travel speed instead of forcing engagement. Structural strength supports repeated passes under tough African conditions. Windrows form consistently, keeping follow-up machines moving without delays. The tool handles mixed material with steady control rather than brute force. Seeing everything fall into place feels oddly relieving. Each pass reduces clutter, leaving land ready for the next stage without extra handling. After land is cleared and material is organized, nature still finds ways to reset the workload overnight. When storms take down mature trees, the job shifts from preparation back to recovery, turning sudden damage into manageable material instead of letting it linger. A large fallen log feeds steadily into the chipper. The log advances section by section, guided straight to keep material flow even. That steady pull keeps the machine working without complaints. Cutting teeth bite through dense spruce fibers, reducing bulky timber into uniform chips for transport and reuse. Feed speed changes instead of forcing pressure, helping blades stay effective longer. That log looks stubborn, then suddenly gives in. Output volume builds quickly, clearing storm debris that once blocked access and space. Chips discharge consistently, ready for landscaping or biomass use. The setup focuses on clearing damage efficiently, rather than show. Surprising how fast chaos turns manageable. Each pass through the chipper shrinks what once dominated the yard, restoring order after the storm without extra handling or wasted motion. Once storm debris and oversized material are reduced, attention shifts to logs that still hold their full value. That's where controlled handling takes over, keeping volume moving without sacrificing order. 8-foot poplar logs are handled efficiently by the Hood S182 log slasher near Savant Lake, Ontario. A loader sets each stem onto the infeed, and the deck holds spacing firm so nothing rolls or drifts out of line. Hydraulic clamps close around the log body, locking position before any movement continues. Once secured, the carriage lifts and shifts the log forward in controlled increments, keeping stems parallel as they travel through the machine. Feed control stays steady, preventing rotation while the log advances through the handling zone. Length is checked visually during transfer, then positioning is adjusted before the next move to keep spacing consistent. Poplar moves easily under clamp pressure, allowing fast release and reset without sticking. The loader matches that pace, placing stems square to speed pickup without rushing the deck. Pass after pass, the Hood S182 maintains order while volume builds, showing how controlled handling can move timber fast, even before any cutting ever happens. With logs already sorted and cut to consistent lengths, the workflow shifts from handling volume to locking in stability. That's when precise crane placement matters most, because everything that happens on the road is decided right here on the deck. Cleanly stacked logs sit secured on the Volvo FH after precise placement by the log lift crane. Uniform stem length across the load makes spacing predictable on the deck. Logs arrive staged and aligned for efficient pickup rather than rushed grabs. The log lift crane swings with measured reach, setting each stem onto the deck without crowding the stakes. Consistent swing paths reduce micro adjustments at the grapple. That calm placement keeps weight balanced before the truck even moves. Stable center of mass positioning limits frame twist during the loading phase. The Volvo FH chassis absorbs shifting loads, while suspension settles fast between lifts. Axle distribution stays even as layers build upward. Operators adjust grapple pressure to match bark and diameter, avoiding crushed fibers. One wrong squeeze here would echo all the way down the road. Loads stack in clean layers. Layer order also defines how restraint forces spread once straps are applied. Delivery efficiency isn't luck. It's built through repeatable handling. Work flows the way it should. Repetition locks the sequence into muscle memory across the crew. By the time the truck pulls away, the system has already done most of the hard thinking. Once truck decks are built for road travel, the same discipline carries over to enclosed loads. Space replaces straps as the limiting factor, and every placement now decides how much volume the container can truly hold. Logs slide into place one by one as the container slowly fills from front to back. Logs are staged nearby so the handling machine can maintain a steady cycle without unnecessary repositioning. Each lift brings selected stems toward the container opening, aligned to use internal volume efficiently. That moment when a full-length log slides in cleanly says the setup is working. Operators focus on orientation first, choosing which end leads to prevent wasted gaps inside the steel walls. Positioning continues with short adjustments rather than long swings, keeping the container stable on the ground. Grabs release only after contact points settle, reducing roll and rebound. The container fills faster by staying calm. Layer by layer, logs are stacked to balance weight from floor to roof, helping the container stay within transport limits. Spacing matters as much as grip strength. Slight rotations align natural curves, so neighboring logs lock together instead of fighting for space. It feels like packing firewood, just on a scale that doesn't forgive mistakes. Once a row is complete, the machine retracts smoothly and reaches for the next stem, without disturbing what's already placed. Final checks will confirm no ends protrude beyond the container frame, doors remain clear, and internal pressure stays even. The sequence ends with a fully loaded unit, ready for sealing and onward shipment.